Having been in education for 47 years as a teacher, coach, counselor, and administrator, Joseph Levis has retired. He is an award-winning author and uses his psychology and counseling background to craft thriller, crime, detective mysteries. He has taken creative writing and screenwriting courses at UCLA and USC, and his books have won nearly 20 awards. And on today's episode of Auto Interview, it's my utmost pleasure to have again on the show Joseph Levis. How are you doing, Joseph?
I'm doing fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's lovely to have you back on P English Literature.
It's nice to be back.
Absolutely. Now, Joseph, I'd love to first say that, congratulations on your new release, Fan Mail. I admire the pace with which you keep cracking out these books. Now fan mails. How did you come about with the concept of fan mails?
Uh, every now and then, we hear reports of celebrities being stalked, and it's usually an adult, not a child. So, what I did in my book is I wanted to use stalking as it occurred to young adults. In this case, there are 15, 16-year-old boys who receive um, fan mail from some unknown person.
Mm.
They ignore the fan mail and it gets gradually more threatening. And it's turned over to the police for them to handle. FBI is involved because it's a federal crime to send mail that is threatening. And there's so much stress upon this family that the father has a heart attack, the adopted boys in the family fighting with one another, threaten really to pull this family apart.
Wow.
And one of the young men who's adopted, Brian, he takes it upon himself to do whatever he can to keep this family together. And that's kind of the storyline.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You always have impressive storylines in it. So it's lovely to know this about fan mail. Now, checking through the books page on Amazon, I see that it is listed under the category of a coming of age fiction, suspense, and crime thriller. I'm curious, how did you develop passion in writing in these genres? And amazingly, this does not only apply to fan mail alone. You have other novels, the likes of Spiral into Darkness and the Lies trilogy that we talked about in time past. They're all killer, they're serial killer, conspiracy, crime, and murder thrillers. What inspired you to write in these themes? I'm just curious.
It's my favorite genre to read. And so it really came natural for me to be able to put my fingers on the keyboard and generate ideas and stories in that same genre. The genre of thriller is so wide, so broad.
Absolutely.
It encompasses part of horror. Stephen King could be argued as being a thriller writer. Um, sometimes it's fantasy, sometimes it's mystery, suspense. I think what sets me apart from other writers is the fact that I have a strong coming of age thread in my writing. Young men questioning who they are as they go through life. And that's certainly the case with the characters in my books.
Wow. That's amazing. I'm a huge fan of some thrillers, and seeing that you another fan mail in this particular genre intrigued me a lot. That I was like, I'm gonna ask him about that. Now, would you like to tell us about your protagonist, Bran Evans?
Yeah, Brian is one of seven adopted brothers. He joined the family and was adopted after his mother and father died.
Oh.
He had no real place to go. He wanted to remain in the area because this is where his friends are. And so his aunts and uncles got together and decided that Jeremy was a suitable um, father, adopted father. And so he's living with the boys. Brian questions who he is and what he's about. He was faced with an extraordinary task um, a, a couple of books ago called Betrayed, where he made a promise to save his brothers, Brett and George.
Hmm.
Um, and he almost died doing it. So
Wow.
now in fan mail, he's really faced with the same decision. He knows what took place in Betrayed up on the Mesa, being faced with by six really bad men and protecting them. And now he's faced with some unknown stalker. We don't know who it is. The reader certainly doesn't. Um, and he's proceeding as if I need to do what I can to fix this family, because that's really what his nature is. Family is ultimately the most important thing to him.
Hmm.
He's a religious young man. Um, he has quite a few friends. He's quite popular. He's quite the athlete, but he's also kind of reserved and kind of quiet. So he's really a mix of several characteristics, sometimes competing with one another.
Wow. I love Bran's characterization. It sounds like a character that made for an interesting read and discussion. Now, Joseph, it's a known fact that every novel or story has a message to pass on or convey and communicate. And now I would love to ask you, what were you trying to achieve in writing fan mail?
That's an interesting question, Peter, because I don't know that any writer sets out with a theme in mind. They
Mm,
basically start out with a story idea and then they proceed from there. It's really after the story has been written that themes emerge. And in this case, fan mail, I didn't really have an idea of what the theme was going to end up being. It turns out to be Brian's story, um, telling the story through his eyes, with his heart, and with his head. He's struggling as to who he is, being um, accepted by his brothers, being accepted by his adoptive mom and dad. There was some conflicts there, but all through it all, family is so important to this young man that he's going to do whatever he can to keep the family together, even if it is the ultimate price of his life.
wow, wow, that's amazing. I so much love the description of fan mail. It sounds very amazing to me. Thank
It's
you for
it's
sharing
it,
this
it is
story.
my it's my highest rated right now book. I've been fortunate with my writing that I very seldom receive anything less than a four, and most of them are in the four, three, four, five range. And fan mail, I believe, is right now the best rated. People really love the character and they really love the story, and they're very satisfied with the ending.
Wow, that's amazing. That's lovely to know. Now, I'm also curious to know if you experience any challenges in the process of writing fan mail. If there is any, could you share with us what challenge it is and how you ultimately overcame it?
I think the challenges that I faced in writing fan mail were really technical in nature. Um, because there was a shooting and somebody almost dies, I had to portray the medical aspect as accurately and as thoroughly as I could. And so I received help from Sharon King, who's a nurse, and
Hmm.
also a couple of doctors who are friends of mine. The other part that I had to struggle with initially was the I'm sorry, the investigative techniques that take place. I received help from a sheriff's deputy, a chief of police, and a forensic scientist, and they were able to put life into the story and making sure that everything that I had written was accurate. Because it doesn't it doesn't do a writer good if he writes something that is inaccurate in any
Absolutely.
one of those areas. He has to be exacting and it has to be accurate. And so those were my challenges. Reaching out to various law enforcement, reaching out to medical, reaching out to forensic scientists to make sure that what I write is actually accurate.
That's amazing because even after reaching out to them and we're able to provide help, it helps the novel to read in an interesting manner. The reader will be like,
Yes.
oh wow, how was the author able to convey Dick's theme completely, able to, communicate on Dick's theme in a perfect manner? How was he able to write the team of investigation? Is he a police or was he once a policeman? How was he able to convey the medical scene, the imagery and the scenarios? Was he a medical doctor? All of those things makes a novel to read quite interesting. I understand what you're talking about, and I think it's a very great thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Now, I also love to ask you, as a published author, what sort of advice do you have for other writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What do you advise people in this category?
I think two things that I would say that I feel are really important is that unless the writer reads, he's not going to have the tools in his toolbox to be able to write a story. That I think is the most important. That the reader writes as well as he reads, and he reads as well as he writes. So I'm never really far away from a book stack of mine that I'm reading, and I keep that going even as I'm writing. You never know what you can pick up from another writer. Um, and then the second piece of advice is that just know that any writer is going to be rejected. There's going to be rejections and there's going to be setbacks. Um, Louisa May Alcott, who's a very famous American writer, was told by an agent and a publisher she better pick up teaching because she'll never be a writer. But yet, if you look at Little Women, that's a classic and it's been around for 100 years. It is that good. J.K. Rowling was told you'll never make it as a writer. You should
Hmm,
give it up. And look what happened with Harry Potter.
hmm,
Somebody took a flyer on it, and she's not only wealthy but famous, and the stories are really good. So
hmm.
just know that even the very best writers out there have received rejections, and it should never let somebody get to you to the point where you quit writing, because you have to remember that a rating or a review is subjective. It is somebody's opinion, but there are just going to be as many um, acceptances and many positive pats on the back, so to speak, that will be coming your way. You just have to remain, I would say, level and even in that you never let something get you so high up that you feel that you're the greatest writer in the world, but you also don't want to be so low as to think you don't have anything to contribute to literature. Just accept the fact that you're going to be rejected, but keep writing anyway.
Yeah, I love your opinion on rejection and the whole advice generally, and I'm hopeful that viewers, including myself, would love to utilize it. Now, Joseph, Fan Mail is your highest rated reviewed book so far as at the time of this interview. What do you
Mm-hmm.
attribute this to?
I think it's because they love the character.
Mm,
My characters are flawed. There are things that there's no perfect character in my book. The father makes mistakes, so does the mother. Each of the boys make their own mistakes. They come into this family with baggage, some of it big, some of it little, and they have to learn not only who am I, but how am I going to get along with the others because they're all adopted. Um, and I think the readers not only like the thriller aspect, the suspense that's involved, but they also really gravitate to the characters that I've created because they seem to be real to people. At least that's what I'm told by readers.
oh, that's amazing. That's lovely. And at this point, I would love you. I don't know if you would like to maybe briefly recite or read a short section, maybe your
Sure,
favorite section. That would be great. Would you love to do that?
sure. To set this up, um, this is the book
Please show
Fan
the
Mail.
book here to the camera. Let's see. Fan mail. Oh, lovely design. Always
Yes.
amazing.
Black Rose Writing is my publisher, and the design team does a really nice job on it. But
You-
to set this up, Brian has been shot. They don't know if he's going to live or die. His worst fears came to fruition in that he knew by saving the three boys that his life could be in danger. There's his youngest brother was also adopted, Michael. Everybody calls him Two. His name is Michael Two Feathers because he's a Navajo Indian. And he and Brian are particularly close. Again, they don't know if he's going to live or die. He wandered off from the rest of the family in the waiting room to be by himself. And his stepbrother, George, who's the same age as Brian, and his stepfather, Jeremy, go seek him out. So that's what we're facing. The little chapel, darkened except for dim lighting and votive candles, was empty except for two who sat in the second pew on the left, head down, shoulders hunched, weeping quietly.
Mm.
Jeremy sat and George sat down on either side of him. Two says, I thought I'd feel Brian here. Neither Jeremy or George responded. I prayed just like Brian taught me. I came with thanks and praise, and I asked God to protect Brian. Jeremy sat back shocked. What else did Brian teach him? I'm sure you did, Jeremy said as he slipped his arm around the boy's narrow shoulders. But why couldn't I feel him? It came out as a sob, and Jeremy hugged him and kissed the side of his head. Because Brian is alive, Jeremy whispered, hoping he was correct. Two shook his head. Brian can't die. We don't know anything yet, Two. No, you don't understand. It's cold and rainy outside. Brian wants to die on a sunny day with a bright blue sky and fluffy white clouds, but not until sunset. That's his favorite time of day. Sunset is when he talks to God about his day. He talks about how he screwed up and how he apologizes and promises to do better. He can't die. It's raining and it's cold and it's not sunny. It's not sunset. He can't die yet. How could Jeremy argue with that? He knew there was nothing he could say or do that would make sense to do. It wasn't the time or place to talk to his youngest about weighty thoughts. I want to be with Brian. He shouldn't be alone, Two whispered as he wiped away tears. Jeremy gave Two a hug, kissed the side of his head, and said, let's go back to the waiting room. The doctor or your mom will be out soon, and they'll give us an update. Two sighed, nodded, and the three of them stood up and left the chapel together to be with the rest of the family and wait.
Wow.
That's probably one of my favorite scenes in the book because it shows the love that the brothers have for one another.
Mm.
It shows that Jeremy, even though he's a dad, does not have all the right answers. And George didn't say a word because he's considering everything and he really doesn't know what to say. So that's my favorite scene, one of my favorite scenes in the entire book.
Wow, that's amazing. That's actually lovely to know. As while you were reading it, a question came to my mind, and I think I put it up today on my media pages. I don't know how writers come with the concept of bringing words together, bringing this idea together, and they put it together in a way that it makes for an amazing, read, an amazing novel. Now, I don't know. How do you get the inspiration to put these stories together? How do you know this is a character you're gonna use? How do you know, just tell me, how do you come about with inspiration towards fan mail?
You know, I read your quote and I had considered that, as throughout the day. I read that earlier today. It's now in the afternoon and where I am. And I've been thinking about that. I can honestly say that sometimes when I sit down at the typewriter or my computer
Hmm.
when I write, I have an idea of what I want to write, the action and who's going to be involved in that action.
Wow,
But I honestly don't know from time to time how it's going to actually come out.
wow,
I had no idea um, of the ending of this particular story until about halfway through. And it just kind of came to me at about halfway point in this book. I knew how it was going to end, where it was going to end, and who was going to be saying what. And I just wrote till I reached the ending that I wanted.
Wow.
Um, it is, I don't, Stephen King says that ideas come to writers in the most strange ways. When I was writing Spiral into Darkness,
Hmm.
as a principal, I was talking to my psychology teacher, and my background is psychology and counseling. And we were talking about nature versus nurture. Are you who you are based upon genetics? Or are you who you are based upon life's circumstances? That evening, I went home and I watched an episode of Criminal Minds, and it was about a serial killer. And the question came to me, is a serial killer born because of DNA? Or is it a case of life's chances, the situation that a serial killer is in that causes him to be a serial killer? And that was the basis of that particular book. But it's two ideas very different from each other of my conversation with my psychology teacher and then seeing an episode on a TV. Ideas come like that to writers. If something is interesting enough, I will think on it, sleep on it, and then I pull out my laptop and start typing away. I don't really have a clear ending. I certainly didn't have a clear theme in mind when I wrote fan mail. It emerged as I wrote it.
Wow. This thing sometimes can sound a bit extraordinary. That sometimes you're like,
Mm.
my God, how did I even come about writing a book like this? That's amazing to know. Thanks for sharing some thought about it. Now, would you like to talk about your new website and the services you render there?
Oh, yeah, that was just put together for me. I contracted. I'm really a technologically idiot. I don't do well with technology. And so I had to hire someone to put that website together. It's jrlewisauthor.com. And you can find all of my books there.
Yeah,
The description, you can even purchase them right off the website.
yeah,
I also write an inspirational blog that is, I try to lift people up, um, try to keep everything positive, and just giving people a thought to think about. I write an author's blog where I'll interview different authors. I will read and write snippets from my books, um, give tips to the new writer and things like that.
yeah,
And then, as you mentioned, I have two services that I'm offering to authors or others. One is a proofreading business, in that if you really want your book to be in the very best light before you send it off, you want to make sure that there aren't any typos, that everything is worded correctly. Is there a better way to word something than
yeah.
not? And that's the proofreading aspect. The other one is I give reviews on books that are out. Um, in fact, I'm doing one right now for another author who's he's a thriller writer, but it's more science fiction. Um, and so I'm just about finished with that particular book. But that was my first customer, so to speak. And then I also have a newsletter that people can sign up for. So it's www.jrlewisauthor.com where they can find everything.
Yeah, that's great. I left a link to the description part of this conversation. Now,
Thank
Joseph,
you.
yeah, you're welcome. Now, in case we have some interested viewers who would love to get a copy of fan mail, on what platform are they available on for purchase?
They can find fan mail on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. It is in both in ebook, either Kindle or Nook, but it's also in paperback version.
That's great. I also left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Joseph
Thank you.
Levy's fan mail directly on Amazon. So thank you so much, Joseph, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature again. It's lovely to have this conversation with you and to have you back on the show.
Well, you're a great host because you have great questions, and it's something I love to do is talk about reading and writing. Um, in November, I'm going to be talking to young kids about writing, and that's something I look forward to. So Again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure as well.